Hey there, and welcome to Family Revenge. We're so glad you're here. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you can stay with us for every twist and turn. Let's jump right in. I had always dreaded our family gatherings. It wasn't just the forced smiles or the endless questions about my career. No, it was the way they judged everything I did. Today was no different. I pulled up to the exclusive country club, the polished marble pillars gleaming under the evening sun. As I parked my humble Honda Civic in the farthest spot I could find, my stomach churned. This was always the hardest part, walking in with a car that screamed ordinary, while my siblings and parents drove in their shiny luxury vehicles, each one more ostentatious than the last. Sure enough, as I walked toward the entrance, I saw Marcus leaning against his Porsche, talking to Victoria, who was next to her Range Rover. Both of them straightened when they saw me, exchanging a look I didn't need to ask about. Well, look who finally showed up, Marcus said, his voice loud enough for everyone around to hear. Emma, are you sure you parked that thing in the right lot? You don't want to embarrass us in front of the other guests. I forced a smile, but I could feel my face burning. It gets me from point A to point B just fine, I said, keeping my voice steady. Victoria, who had been quietly sipping her drink, chimed in. I don't get it, Emma. Why wouldn't you just upgrade your car? You've been working with that nonprofit for how long now? If you really cared about making something of yourself, you'd invest in something better. I swallowed hard. It's reliable, I said, my fingers tightening around my purse. Reliable doesn't cut it in our circle, Marcus interrupted, his tone dismissive. It's about appearances, Emma. If you want to be taken seriously, you need to start acting like you belong here. Look around you. These people don't care about your so-called cause unless it looks good on paper. He motioned toward the other guests as they mingled near the bar, all of them perfectly put together, effortlessly elegant in a way I'd never be. I wanted to argue. I wanted to say that the work I did meant something more than just a paycheck or a flashy car. But I knew better. Every time I tried, it just felt like I was talking to a wall. So instead, I nodded, keeping my mouth shut as they both laughed lightly. Let's go inside, Victoria said, glancing at her watch. The dinner's about to start. We walked in together, but I felt like I was trailing behind. The grand ballroom, with its shimmering chandeliers and velvet-draped walls, felt suffocating. The people, all of them, were so perfectly polished, some of them from prestigious law firms, others in finance. And here I was, the odd one out, stuck in a room full of million-dollar conversations, all the while carrying the weight of my family's judgment on my shoulders. As we sat down at the dinner table, the contrast between my life and theirs seemed impossible to ignore. The conversation flowed naturally among everyone, discussing mergers, investments, the latest exotic vacation destinations. Every mention of a new business venture felt like a slap to the face. How's the nonprofit work going, Emma? Victoria asked, her voice tinged with sarcasm. Is it still volunteerism? I hated how she said it, like it was some sort of joke. It's going well, I replied, my voice a little firmer. We've been able to help hundreds of kids this year alone. How nice, Marcus cut in, his tone dripping with disinterest. But honestly, Emma, I think it's time you start thinking about something that actually brings in money. I mean, come on, volunteerism doesn't exactly scream financial success, does it? I felt my chest tighten. I'm not in it for the money, I said, my voice wavering slightly. It's about making a difference. Marcus shook his head, rolling his eyes. Sure, but you can't live off goodwill. At some point, you have to grow up and accept that this is a world that cares about success and power. Nonprofit work is nice, but it's not the kind of thing that'll get you anywhere around here. I could feel the weight of his words pressing on me, the suffocating feeling of being nothing but a charity case in my own family's eyes. This wasn't the first time it had happened. These little jabs, these insults disguised as concern. But tonight, it felt worse than ever. The dinner dragged on, but all I could hear was the hum of their voices, dismissing me, my work, my life choices. I was the outsider in a family that only valued success when it had a price tag attached. As the night continued, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was more of a burden than a part of something. Even when I excused myself to go to the bathroom, the look on Marcus's face when he looked me up and down spoke volumes. I wasn't like them. I wasn't good enough to belong. I stood at the mirror in the restroom, taking in my reflection. The woman staring back at me wasn't the one I wanted to be. She was worn out, exhausted from trying to prove her worth to people who would never understand. And the worst part? I had spent years trying to fit into their world, trying to make them see me as more than just the poor, idealistic sister. But no matter how hard I tried, I knew it would never be enough. Tonight, as the conversations continued in the background, something inside me began to shift. I was tired of proving myself to people who didn't care to see who I truly was. And as I left the restroom and returned to the table, the thought crystallized in my mind. It was time for a confrontation. It was time to stop pretending that their approval meant anything to me. I was done. The evening air had cooled by the time I stepped outside, my heels tapping sharply against the polished pavement as I made my way toward my car. I needed a moment to myself after the dinner. I needed to breathe. The world inside the country club had felt stifling, suffocating even, and the last thing I wanted was to go back into that shark tank of shallow conversations. As I reached my Honda Civic, I unlocked the door and slid inside, grateful for the quiet, the peace. For a split second, I considered driving away, just leaving. But I knew that wasn't going to happen. I hadn't even started the engine when I saw Marcus walking toward me, his expression already set in that all-too-familiar scowl. "You really need to stop driving that thing," Marcus said as he leaned against the side of my car, crossing his arms. "It's embarrassing." I blinked, my heart sinking. "Embarrassing? It's a reliable car, Marcus. It gets me where I need to go." He scoffed, running a hand through his hair. "That's not the point, Emma. It's not about what's practical. It's about what it says about you, about us." He glanced toward the entrance of the country club, where the rest of the family was still inside, probably clinking glasses and pretending to care about each other's latest investment. "Do you honestly think people take you seriously when you show up to events like this in a car that looks like it belongs to someone who doesn't even have a job?" I stared at him for a moment, biting my lip. "It's a car, Marcus. It doesn't define who I am." "You don't get it, do you?" His voice grew sharper, more insistent. "This isn't about you. This is about the family. You're dragging us down with your choices, Emma. If you really care about us, about being part of this family, you need to upgrade. And I don't mean just your car. I mean your whole life. You need to start acting like you belong in a place like this, or stop coming altogether." I felt the blood rush to my face, but I forced myself to keep calm, to stand my ground. "I'm not going to let your idea of success dictate my life, Marcus," I said firmly. "I don't care about your cars or your money or your image. I care about doing work that makes a difference. I care about helping people." His eyes narrowed, disbelief in his gaze. "Helping people? That's your excuse? Emma, your career is just volunteerism. It's not real work. It doesn't get you anywhere. You'll never get ahead like this." The words stung, but I refused to let him see how much they hurt. "You're wrong," I said, my voice steady, though the anger simmered just beneath the surface. "My work is real. It matters. And if you can't see that, then maybe you're the one who's blind." For a moment, Marcus just stared at me, his lips curled into a half-smile of mockery. "You keep telling yourself that, but if you want to be part of this world, Emma, you've got to start playing by its rules, or else you'll always be on the outside." His words felt like a slap in the face. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the tremor in my hands. "I don't need this world, Marcus. I'm not trying to fit in here. I never was. And I sure as hell don't need to prove my worth by driving a fancy car or wearing a suit like the rest of you." I paused, meeting his eyes. "I don't need your approval to know that what I do is important." Marcus didn't respond at first. He just looked at me, the disbelief still etched on his face, before shaking his head with a sigh. "You just don't get it, do you?" "No," I replied, my voice colder than I intended. "I don't. But I'm starting to realize that's okay." The silence between us stretched out for a long moment, thick with unsaid words. Finally, Marcus pushed off my car and shrugged. "Fine, do what you want, but don't say I didn't warn you." I didn't answer. Instead, I started the engine and pulled away, leaving him standing in the parking lot behind me. As I drove, the words he'd said echoed in my mind, his voice lingering like a bad taste. I'd always known my family was different, but tonight something inside me shifted. I wasn't sure if I had always known, or if I'd just started to realize it, but I no longer cared about fitting in. I had spent so much of my life trying to gain their approval, to prove myself. But now, I wasn't going to let their narrow, shallow views define me any longer. It was time to stop playing by their rules. And as I drove, I knew one thing for sure. I was done with the guilt. I was done letting them make me feel like I wasn't good enough. I was going to find my own path, and maybe, just maybe, it would take me far away from the world they so desperately clung to. I pulled into my driveway, the familiar feeling of frustration still simmering in my chest. The evening had been a long one, my family's words echoing in my mind like a constant hum. As I turned off the car and stepped out, I was relieved to be home, to be away from their judgment and their expectations. But of course, Marcus had followed me. I didn't need to look behind me to know he was there. His Porsche was parked just behind my Honda, its polished black paint reflecting the streetlights. He was always ready to lecture, and tonight was no different. As soon as I stepped onto the front porch, he was there, walking up behind me with that same condescending look on his face. "Nice place," he said, eyeing the modest middle-class home with an air of judgment. "But when are you going to grow up and move to a place that actually fits your success?" I froze. That question, "When are you going to grow up?" had been a constant in my life. It was a question that made me feel small, like everything I had worked for wasn't worth anything unless it had a bigger price tag attached. I took a deep breath and turned to face him. "This is my home, Marcus," I said, my voice cold. "I've worked hard for everything I have, and I'm proud of it." He shrugged, unconvinced. "I mean, sure, but it's just, I don't know. It's not what I expected from you, Emma. You've got so much potential. You could do better than this if you just tried." The words stung, and I could feel my frustration growing. He didn't understand. He never had. He saw everything I'd done as nothing more than a series of poor choices, choices he felt I had made out of laziness or lack of ambition. But the truth was, I had never been more successful. He just couldn't see it, and it made me wonder why I even bothered trying to prove myself to him. Without thinking, I walked around to the side of the house, heading toward the garage. I could hear Marcus's footsteps behind me, the curiosity and impatience in his stride. He followed me without question, probably ready to lecture me some more about how I was wasting my potential on my non-profit nonsense. I stopped in front of the large, locked garage door. "You really want to see what I've been up to, Marcus?" I asked, my voice low but steady. He raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "What's this about?" I unlocked the door and pushed it open, revealing my secret. As the light flicked on, I could see Marcus's expression shift from confusion to shock. Inside, the garage wasn't just filled with boxes or the typical things one would expect to find in a home garage. It was filled with luxury cars that were worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. There, front and center, were two sports cars, a McLaren and a Porsche 911 Turbo, their sleek bodies glistening under the fluorescent light. Beside them, there was a limited edition Mercedes-Benz, a vintage Ferrari, and even a Lamborghini. The room smelled of leather and polished metal. Marcus stood in the doorway, frozen, unable to speak. His mouth hung slightly open as he took in the sight before him. "Emma," he said, his voice trailing off in disbelief. "What is all this?" I crossed my arms, watching him process what he was seeing. "These are my cars. This is my garage." He blinked a few times, still trying to make sense of it. "You... how? When? I thought you were struggling with your nonprofit thing." I could hear the judgment still in his voice, the disbelief that I, of all people, could afford such extravagance. But now, instead of hiding it, I wanted him to understand. "I've been building my wealth for years, Marcus," I said, my voice calm and firm. "I didn't want to tell you because I didn't want you to judge me, but I've been running a successful business. Digital Learning Dynamics, it's a tech company, and it's been growing steadily for a while now." His eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw him unsure of himself. "A tech company?" he repeated, disbelief still hanging in his tone. I nodded. "Yes, and it's worth millions. I'm not just some nonprofit worker, Marcus. I've built this from the ground up. I don't need to rely on anyone else to make a living. I'm financially secure, more than secure." I could see him processing it, still reeling from the shock. I had no idea," he muttered, almost to himself. "But if you have all this, why do you still do that nonprofit stuff? Why not just focus on this?" I stepped forward, looking him directly in the eye. "Because the money doesn't matter, Marcus. Not like you think it does. It's about making a difference. This," I gestured to the cars, "is just a symbol of my success. But it's not why I do what I do. I don't need your approval or anyone else's." Marcus remained silent, clearly trying to piece everything together. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but the words failed him. "You've been judging me for all the wrong reasons," I said, my voice softening slightly. "I've built something meaningful, something real. I'm successful, but I do it my way, not yours." He stood there, completely stunned. It wasn't just the cars that had thrown him off. It was the realization that everything he had assumed about me was wrong. And I could see it in his eyes. The doubt was beginning to creep in, challenging everything he thought he knew about his sister. After a long pause, he finally managed to speak. I I don't know what to say." I took a deep breath, not knowing if this conversation had changed anything. But at least now, Marcus would understand the depth of my life, the choices I'd made, and the success I had achieved. It was up to him to decide how he wanted to process it. I wasn't going to change for him anymore. "Maybe now you'll finally see who I really am," I said quietly, turning to walk back toward the house. "Maybe now you'll stop trying to make me something I'm not." As I headed inside, I could hear Marcus still standing in the garage, his voice just a faint echo in the distance. But I didn't wait for him to follow. I had nothing left to prove. Marcus had followed me back to my house, the low growl of his Porsche behind me an ever-present reminder that, for all my attempts at standing my ground, I was still very much a part of his world. The world that valued wealth and status, a world I had tried so hard to fit into, but never quite belonged. As I opened the door to my home, I was already bracing myself for more of his judgment. The house wasn't a mansion, far from it, but it was mine. It was comfortable, quiet, and in a neighborhood that had a real sense of community. But for Marcus, it was always going to be too small, too humble, too normal. I didn't say anything as I led him inside, my footsteps echoing in the entryway. He followed behind me, looking around like a man stepping into a foreign land. He had no idea what he was about to see. "Your place could use a little upgrading," he said, his tone still condescending, as though he was doing me a favor by offering his advice. "When are you going to grow up, Emma? Maybe get a place that's a little more impressive?" I resisted the urge to snap at him. Instead, I walked down the hallway toward my office. "Come on," I said. "I'll show you something." He followed me, clearly confused. As I opened the door to my office, I watched his face shift from confusion to awe. The room wasn't what he'd expected. My desk was sleek, the walls lined with bookshelves filled with business strategy books, technology manuals, and files I'd spent years compiling. On one side of the room, a massive flat-screen monitor displayed real-time data on my company's growth. The digital dashboards of my business, digital learning dynamics, flickered with live numbers. For the first time, Marcus seemed to hesitate, not sure where to look. "Why are you showing me all this?" he asked, a little defensive. I walked over to the desk, where a stack of contracts sat neatly arranged. "This," I said, tapping the surface, "is my life, Marcus. This is where I've been putting in the work for years. I don't just work for a paycheck. I work for something that matters." His eyebrows knitted together in confusion. "I don't get it. You always talk about helping people. But what about this? All this," he motioned vaguely around the room, "isn't exactly about helping people." I felt a tightness in my chest, but I forced myself to explain. Digital Learning Dynamics is a business that combines profit with purpose. We partner with universities, corporations, and even governments to improve educational systems around the world. The tech we develop is transforming education, making learning more accessible, more effective. That's what matters. Marcus scoffed, still struggling to reconcile what I was saying with what he had always believed about me. "But this isn't what you've always told us, Emma. You've been so focused on your nonprofit stuff. How did this all happen? You've been hiding it from us." I took a deep breath, keeping my voice calm. "Because, Marcus, I didn't want you to dismiss me the way you always have. I didn't want my family to see me as a failure just because I didn't follow the path you wanted for me. But now, you need to understand. I've built something that I'm proud of. I'm not some volunteer who's just scraping by. I'm a businesswoman." His gaze flickered to the monitor on the wall, the numbers scrolling across it like a foreign language to him. "So, what does all this mean?" he finally asked, his voice quiet, almost cautious. "How much are you making?" I leaned against the desk, trying not to let the weight of the question make me feel small. "In the last year, we've grossed $67 million. And that's just the start. We're expanding rapidly, with new contracts coming in every week." For a moment, Marcus was silent, his eyes darting back to the screen, His mouth parted slightly, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. 70 million? You, you're serious? I nodded. I'm serious. I've worked hard to get here. This isn't some side project, Marcus. It's a thriving business that's helping people while also making a significant profit. His eyes slowly traveled back to me, the weight of what I had said finally starting to settle in. I I had no idea, he admitted, his voice small, like he wasn't sure how to process it. You never told me any of this. You never mentioned any of it. I walked over to the wall where a few awards were displayed, recognitions for achievements in education and innovation. I didn't want to, because you and Victoria only care about what's on the surface. You care about the car I drive, the house I live in, not the actual work I'm doing. You never cared about what was important to me. He shifted uncomfortably, clearly unsure of what to say next. For the first time in years, I could see the cracks in his facade, the realization that his perception of me was completely wrong. I don't get it, he said, sounding almost lost. How do you balance all of this? The business, the nonprofit work, everything? I smiled, a little softer now, though the exhaustion of the night still weighed on me. It's about finding a purpose, Marcus. I didn't want to sacrifice my values to get ahead, so I built a company that funds my nonprofit work while still being profitable. I don't have to choose between the two. He nodded, his eyes flickering between the monitors, still processing everything. But I could see the shift in him, the gradual understanding dawning. It wasn't just about the numbers, the tech, or the cars. It was about me and how I had built a life that didn't fit into the narrow box he'd always placed me in. For the first time, I wasn't just Emma, the little sister who was stuck in a nonprofit job. I was Emma, the woman who had created something powerful, something sustainable, something that could no longer be dismissed. Marcus didn't speak for a long time, and when he did, his voice was softer than before. I had no idea, Emma. I've been so wrong about you. I could feel a slight crack in the armor he had built up around himself, and in that moment, I knew that things between us had shifted. Maybe, just maybe, he was starting to see me for who I really was. I had just settled into my favorite chair in my office, the soft hum of the city outside my window a welcome background as I sifted through a few documents. It had been a long week, and tonight was no different, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that I needed to do something. I had already spent too much time trying to explain myself to Marcus. It was exhausting. That's when the phone rang. I glanced at the screen, expecting one of my usual clients, maybe a vendor. But the name that flashed was different. Dr. Sarah Chin, Harvard University. I picked up the phone, my heart skipping a beat. It wasn't every day I heard from someone at Harvard. Hello, this is Emma, I said, trying to mask my surprise with professionalism. Hi, Emma. This is Dr. Sarah Chin from Harvard University. I'm calling to inform you that after reviewing your proposal and technology, we've decided to move forward with implementing your educational technology into our curriculum. I sat up straighter, the words registering slowly. Wait, what? You're going to use our tech? Yes, absolutely. We're excited to bring digital learning dynamics on board. The contract is for $12.7 million over 4 years, and we'll be using your platform across multiple departments. The weight of the moment hit me like a freight train. $12.7 million. Harvard. The scale of it was staggering. It wasn't just another client, it was proof that my company had become a game changer. Thank you, I managed to say, my voice catching for just a moment. This is incredible. We're thrilled as well. I'll have the formal contract sent over for your review, and we can schedule a kickoff meeting next week. We look forward to seeing the positive impact your technology will have on our students. I barely heard the rest of the conversation. My mind was racing, trying to process the enormity of what had just happened. Harvard, one of the most prestigious institutions in the world, had chosen to partner with me, with us. This wasn't just a win for the business. It was a validation of everything I had been working toward. Emma, are you still there? Dr. Chin's voice pulled me back to reality. Yes, sorry. I'm here. I'll have my team review the contract and get back to you. Thank you again. This is a huge opportunity. I look forward to it. Take care. The line went silent, but I stood there, frozen for a moment, the gravity of it all sinking in. And then I heard it, a soft tap on the doorframe. I turned to see Marcus standing there, watching me with an unreadable expression. I hadn't even heard him come in. He must have overheard the conversation. What was that? he asked quietly. I didn't need to ask what he meant. He had heard the numbers, the prestige. He was finally beginning to understand that there was more to me than he had ever imagined. That, I said, my voice a little firmer now, was Harvard. They've decided to implement our technology in their curriculum. The contract is worth $12.7 million over 4 years. Marcus stared at me, his jaw slightly slack, like the words hadn't fully registered. He stepped further into the room, his eyes scanning the desk, the monitors, the various tech contracts scattered around. Harvard, he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. Emma, that's huge. I didn't know. I could see it now, the cracks in his skepticism, the disbelief fading into a kind of awe that was long overdue. Yeah, I said, crossing my arms, feeling a wave of relief that had nothing to do with the money. It's huge, and it's just one of many big projects we've got going on. His eyes moved from the desk to the screen on the wall, where the live feed from my business dashboard displayed the latest metrics: $67 million in annual revenue, contracts with top universities, expanding partnerships with Fortune 500 companies. His eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw him struggle to find the words. You've been hiding this from me, he said, almost accusingly, though there was no anger in his voice, only confusion. Why? Why didn't you tell me? We've had these conversations, and I always thought you were struggling. I thought you were barely scraping by with that nonprofit stuff. I stepped toward him, the frustration I had been holding back all evening finally finding its release. Because, Marcus, I knew you wouldn't believe me. You've never cared about what I've been doing, just how much money I make or whether I fit into your idea of success. His face softened, and I saw the realization sink in. I didn't know, he admitted, shaking his head as if trying to process everything at once. I thought you were just doing volunteer work. I never understood what you were really building. I exhaled slowly. That's because I didn't want to share it with you. Every time I tried to explain what I was doing, all I ever got was judgment. You've always seen my choices as failures. You never saw the bigger picture. I watched him take a step back, his gaze now shifting from the monitors to me, a mix of guilt and awe in his eyes. I had no idea. I was wrong. All this time, Yes, you were wrong, I interrupted, my voice shaking now, though I wasn't sure whether from anger or relief. But it's not just about proving you wrong, Marcus. It's about me finally understanding that I don't have to prove anything to you or anyone else. He opened his mouth as if to respond, but the words didn't come. He just stood there, absorbing everything, absorbing me for the first time in his life. Finally, he spoke again, his voice quieter now. I think I need to process this. I didn't realize how much you've done, Emma. I didn't realize what you've built. I nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle between us. I didn't want you to, because the truth is, Marcus, I don't need your approval anymore. I've done this for me, not for you, not for anyone else. He nodded slowly, his gaze flicking to the door. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything, I replied, my voice steady now. Just think about it. Think about everything I've done, not just what you assumed about me. He nodded again, more slowly this time. I will. I'm sorry, Emma. I really am. And for the first time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, he finally understood. The following days after the Harvard call were a blur, but I knew there was still one thing left unsaid between Marcus and me. I could see that he was processing everything, staring at my luxury cars, then retreating to my home office where he saw the full scale of my business. But there was more to the story than just the tangible evidence of my success. One evening, a few days after the Harvard deal had been finalized, Marcus returned. This time, there was no Porsche parked in my driveway. Instead, he pulled up in his usual sleek black Porsche, as if the two worlds we now shared, the one where I was running a multi-million-dollar company and the one where he could still only view me through his narrow lens of success, had collided. Emma, we need to talk, he said as he stepped out, his voice still holding the remnants of his earlier surprise, but tinged with something else. Guilt, maybe. I nodded, leading him back inside. Sure. What's on your mind? He hesitated for a moment before speaking. So, about the money, I don't really get it. How much are you actually worth now? I had been expecting this question. Marcus wasn't one to ask about things like net worth, but now that he'd seen everything, My cars, the business metrics, the contracts. I knew the curiosity had to come to a head. About $94 million, I said, my voice calm. Between the business, my real estate, and liquid assets, that's where I stand. I watched as his eyes widened, and for a second, it seemed like he couldn't breathe. The realization of just how wrong he had been about me was starting to take full effect. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about his whole perception of me, of who I was. Wait, you have that much? His voice was quieter now, his usual confidence slipping. But you've been living like you were struggling. I nodded slowly, not surprised by the confusion. Yeah, I've been living modestly. But that's not why I do what I do, Marcus. You never understood that. His face twisted in what could only be described as confusion mixed with guilt. I always thought you were you know, just getting by. I never imagined it was anything like this. It feels like everything I've known about you has been a lie. It's not a lie, I said firmly, walking toward the window and looking out at the quiet street outside. You just never bothered to ask. You never asked what I was really doing with my life. You only cared about how much I earned or whether my life measured up to your standards. And honestly, I didn't care about that. Marcus stood there silently for a moment, digesting what I'd said. He'd always seen me as the good sister who played it safe, who, in his eyes, was never successful enough because she didn't follow the traditional path of making money through high-powered careers. But what Marcus didn't see was that my definition of success had never been about the numbers on a paycheck. Do you really think you've been hiding this from us for so long? His words were soft now, as if he were truly beginning to understand. That whole time, you were just working behind the scenes, building something bigger than anything we ever imagined. I turned to face him, my eyes steady. I didn't hide it, Marcus. I just didn't think you'd ever care. It's always been about the work for me, not about making money for the sake of it. But the cars, he stammered, pointing toward the window where my collection was parked. I never thought you were into that. You always made it sound like you didn't care about material things. I don't care about material things, Marcus. Not the way you think I do, I explained. These cars are a byproduct of the success I've worked for. They're symbols of how far I've come, but they don't define who I am. They don't define what I do. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing. Finally, he spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. I was wrong. All these years, I just assumed you were failing. But you've done something that I don't know. I just didn't see it. I never saw you as someone capable of all this. The guilt was evident in his tone now, and I could see how much it was affecting him. I could tell he didn't know how to reconcile his perception of me with the reality I had just shown him. The Emma he knew wasn't supposed to be this successful, this self-sufficient, this confident. I shook my head. I know you didn't, and I don't blame you. You and Victoria. You've always been so focused on the outward signs of success, the cars, the clothes, the flashy jobs, but that's never been what mattered to me. It's about impact, about doing work that means something. Marcus sighed, sinking into the couch, finally starting to understand. You always felt like an outsider to us. And now I get it. You weren't the outsider. I was. I couldn't see beyond my own narrow view of success. I thought I had everything figured out, but I've been blind. I'm not angry with you, Marcus, I said softly, sitting beside him. I know you never meant to make me feel small, but the truth is, I've spent so much of my life trying to prove myself to you, and I finally realized I don't need to. He nodded slowly, his head drooping slightly in regret. I'm sorry. I should have seen who you really are. I just didn't get it. I looked at him, feeling a strange sense of peace. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had fully shown him who I was. Not for approval, not for validation, but just to be seen for who I really was. Someone who had made a difference, on her own terms. I hope you start seeing things differently, Marcus. It's not about the material stuff, it's about making a difference. And I want you to understand that. He looked at me then, truly looking at me for the first time in years. I see it now, he said quietly, his voice filled with something I hadn't heard from him before, respect. I really do. For the first time in a long time, I felt like my brother was finally seeing me. And maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something new. The evening after Marcus's revelations was quieter than I had expected. The tension from earlier had shifted, leaving behind a sense of quiet understanding that felt unfamiliar, but in a good way. I had finally let him in, really in, and now there was no going back. He had spent the last few days processing everything I had shown him: the cars, the numbers, the success I had built for myself, and the nonprofit work I had supported. For the first time in our lives, I felt like we were speaking on the same level, that he wasn't seeing me through the lens of his judgments anymore. It wasn't just the wealth that had shaken him, it was the fact that everything he had believed about me, the girl who was always struggling and too idealistic, had been wrong. And now, he was beginning to grasp the scale of my life, the depth of the work I had done. As I sat in the living room, scrolling through a few work emails, I heard the familiar sound of Marcus's Porsche pull up in the driveway. My stomach fluttered in a way I couldn't quite explain. Part of me wasn't sure if I was ready for this moment. What would he say? Would he really understand? The doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, set my phone down, and walked to answer it. Standing there was Marcus, his usual confident stance gone. He looked unsure, almost hesitant. There was something about him that seemed different, softer. And I realized that for the first time in years, he was no longer the older brother who viewed me as the underachiever. He was finally seeing me for who I really was. "I've been thinking a lot," he began, his voice quieter than usual. "I've been thinking about everything you said, about the way I've treated you, the way I've judged you." His eyes met mine, and for once, I didn't see the usual dismissive flicker. There was something close to regret in them. I stood there, unsure of how to respond, but he didn't give me the chance to speak. "I was wrong, Emma. I've been wrong for years. I didn't see you, really see you. I was so focused on what I thought success should look like that I missed everything you were doing, everything you've accomplished, and I'm sorry." I didn't know what to say. I wanted to reach out and hug him, to tell him that it was okay, but a part of me still felt guarded. The years of judgment couldn't just vanish in an instant, but his apology, genuine, sincere, was everything I had been waiting for. "You don't have to apologize," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "You didn't know. None of you did. You were all so caught up in your own world that you couldn't see mine." He nodded slowly, his eyes reflecting the weight of what he had said. "That doesn't make it right, though. I should have been there for you. I should have been proud of you, not just of your success, but of everything you've done, everything you've built, the woman you've become." I felt my heart swell slightly, a sense of warmth spreading through me. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear those words from him. All these years, I had been trying to prove my worth to him, to show him that I wasn't a failure, but now he was saying it. He was finally seeing me for who I was, not as the underachiever or the disappointment, but as the woman I had fought so hard to become. "I don't need you to be proud of me, Marcus," I said, my voice quieter now. "I just need you to see me for who I really am." "I see you now," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry it took me this long." We stood there for a long moment, both of us silently processing the shift between us. It wasn't just the apology, it was the understanding. The understanding that we could finally move past the judgments of the past and start something new. Something that wasn't based on appearances or expectations, but on respect and genuine care. "You're not the person I thought you were," Marcus said after a while, the words more of a realization than an accusation. "And that's on me, but I want to change that. I want to stop seeing you as someone who needs to prove themselves, because you've already done that. You've done more than I could have ever imagined." I smiled, though it was bittersweet. "Thank you. It's all I ever wanted, just to be seen." He nodded again slowly, taking in everything I had said. "I'll do better, I promise. I won't ever belittle you again. And I'll try to see things differently, to value the things that really matter, because now I get it." For the first time in years, I felt like Marcus truly understood. And not just my success, but why I had chosen the path I did. It wasn't about the cars, the money, or the titles. It was about the difference I was making in the world. It was about living a life that was true to me, not to anyone else's expectations. As he turned to leave, I stood in the doorway, watching him. "You know," I said, my voice a little lighter, "I'm not going anywhere. I'm still the same person you've always known." He turned to face me, a faint smile crossing his lips. "I know, and that's what makes you so amazing. I've just been too blind to see it." He walked away then, but this time I didn't feel that familiar knot of resentment. Instead, I felt a sense of peace, a peace I hadn't known in years. For the first time in my life, my family was starting to see me for who I truly was. And that was enough. As Marcus drove away, I stood there watching him go. I didn't need him to agree with me anymore. I didn't need anyone to agree with me. I had already won. Not because of the cars or the money, but because I had reclaimed my worth on my own terms. And that was the most powerful thing of all.